Welcome back to the news tonight, and our conversation will talk about analyzing the Global Fact-Checking Network Forum on October the 29th. The third International Forum Dialogue about Fakes 3.0 was held in Moscow, bringing together approximately 4,000 participants from over 80 countries. And the event was held under the auspices of UNESCO and was included in the organization's official calendar for Global Media and Information Literacy Week, making it the only Russian forum with this status. This forum brought together fact-checking experts, representatives of government agencies, international organizations, media outlets, and the scientific and technological communities, focusing on developing methods to counter false information on a global level. Key topics for discussion included the challenges of the era of generative AI and deepfakes, the spread of fake news in science and education, the development of media literacy, and the verification of tools. The president of the Global Fact-Checking Network, Vladimir Tabak, addressed the forum participants with an opening speech. He says, and I quote just a bit, "The wide geographical range of the forum's participants proves that the problem of fake news knows no borders, and which means our association must be open to all. We're removing barriers, including linguistic ones. Our shared goal is to establish effective rules to combat the information threats that endanger all of humanity." And speaking about the principles of the international expert community, the GFCN president outlined its key mission, which is the essence of fact-checking. It's not about bans and censorship, but about ensuring the right to the truth. We provide people with the knowledge and tools to ensure their choices are free and informed and not the result of manipulation by others, unquote. Also speaking at that event was Maria Zakharova, the spokesperson of the Foreign Ministry. And she said, and I quote, "We must do everything in our power to ensure that the scales of truth are balanced. We are witnessing, as I've already said, a real epidemic, a pandemic of fake news and disinformation that has engulfed the entire world." And of course, an investigative journalist who joins us in tonight, Christopher Hilali, said, and I quote, that information is everywhere. It's in the cyberspace, it's everywhere, and it's present on a routine, everyday level when we use our phones and televisions. In terms of impact, we can compare this to the shock wave generated by a nuclear reactor or an explosion that could kill tens of millions of people. We're joining in tonight to talk about this forum is Christopher Hilali, and he's an investigative journalist from the United States of America in Moscow. Hello, good evening, Christopher, and welcome to the show tonight.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you. So let's go straight to the point here. So we heard a lot at this forum last month, and of course, when the Mariah spoke about Mother Mariah spoke about deep fakes and trying to let everyone know that we must do everything to ensure that the scales of truth are balanced. Well, a lot of people would want to ask, when you talk about fact checking, sometimes I also ask, who is actually fact checking? So what are the parameters that the audience, would always judge by? Because we have a lot of news everywhere now, and we identified a lot of deep fakes and, of course, some things that we can be able to do to fact check our stories. So could you give us a background of that forum and what you think that we must do?
So the forum brought together journalists and experts who are committed to doing their journalistic due diligence in bringing the truth and bringing factual information to the audiences around the world. And it really was a phenomenal opportunity to network and to get with so many fantastic journalists, influencers, bloggers, and vloggers, and those in the information space, including in academia, diplomacy, business, and politics. And what really came out was the fact that right now, Russia, as well as many other countries in the global south, are victims of massive disinformation, misinformation, and outright fake news campaigns, especially by the Western media. And that is so critical to understand at this point, and is something very, very important that your viewers should be well aware of. And I think that of the things that was critical was about our experiences and about the latest news and developments within our specific domains and fields, especially in our focus areas. For example, you are in Africa, I'm in Russia, in between Russia and the US. Some came from the Middle East, some came from East Asia, some from Latin America, some from Europe. And so we really had an opportunity to really understand what's going on around the world. And one of the key things was how to build the capacities amongst our populations for critical thinking, for discernment, and for ultimately understanding the deeper meaning and messaging behind a lot of what we see and what's going on. And that's really at the core of what we experience at the forum on the dialogue of fakes.
And we would know that the media is at the middle of it all, sometimes maybe at the very integral part of it all. So, of course, I wanted to ask Mother Mariah at that forum, but there was no time to talk to her. That, does it feel like Russia started a bit late when it comes to rebutting some of these fake stories? And not just Russia, besides, because there are many fake stories around the world, even maybe also about the West. It's just a lot of web of deep fakes and propaganda all around the world. So do you think that particularly the global South, and maybe referring to Russia as well, started a bit late when it comes to stopping this fake news and fake stories about them?
Absolutely, they started late, and the problem with that is that we have been subjected to propaganda, misinformation, and disinformation for so long, and we remember, of course, some of the key moments. We remember in the United States in the build-up to the Gulf War, the fake news about the incubators and the babies that were killed supposedly by Iraqi soldiers, which never happened. It was purely propaganda. We remember the allegations of war crimes that were supposedly committed by Serbian forces, which gave the green light for the bombardment of Yugoslavia. We had the fake news around the Iraq war and the so-called weapons of mass destructions, the fake news around Gaddafi, the fake news around Assad and the chemical weapons. There's been so much misinformation, and especially contemporary, there's been misinformation about what's going on in Nigeria. Excuse me. There's been misinformation about what's going on in Russia, in specifically about the special military operation, about what's going on with the current situation in Crimea. There's been so many fake news and information that it's proliferated so much that a lot of the global South has been victimized by it and now has to combat it. And it's taken a lot of time because they had never built necessarily the architecture and the capabilities to really go head to head with Western media, which, by the way, is financed to the tune of billions of dollars. So they have to create their own infrastructure, they have to train their own journalists, they have to provide for that excellence that is demanded of our journalistic profession. And that's something that they are late to the game, obviously, in this situation. But what we saw at the conference in Moscow is that we are rapidly catching up because in the era of social media, we have access to major platforms where we can create massive followings and try to push back against a lot of that disinformation with far less cost than starting an entire media organization and enterprise that takes a lot of investment and time and is necessary to have support from business partners, from corporations, or from the public in general. So that's been a positive, is that social media has proven very valuable in combating a lot of these lies and misinformation spread by the West. And of course, we know the recent scandal at the BBC. So you can clearly see that a lot of these Western media outlets continue to fail in upholding their journalistic duties and their basic integrity by spreading false and fake narratives that continue to malign many of the countries, especially in the global South, as well as politicians in their home countries that they disagree with.
No, if you feel comfortable talking to me about your visit, your short visit to the special military operation some days ago, is it okay by you to talk about that? And would you want to let our audience know, what it is there? Because this is some of the perspectives that we begin to look at when we talk about some of the fake news spread around, especially about the special military operations there. Could you talk to us about it?
Absolutely. I've been to Special Military Operations Zone 3 times. I just got back from the Kursk Oblast, and for those who are unaware, Kursk was, which is a part of the Russian Federation, was invaded by Ukrainian troops last August, and they committed many massacres. They took over a major city called Suja. They committed absolutely horrific crimes against the civilian population. They indiscriminately bombarded civilian infrastructure, civilian and residential homes. And one thing that became very apparent when speaking with Ukrainian prisoners of war was that they were forced to do this, they were forcibly mobilized, they had no choice. But in fact, the real criminals were the fascists and ultra nationalists, as well as the foreign mercenaries from Poland, from the United States, from Colombia, from France. These were some of the most brutal, soldiers that committed atrocities against the civilian population. I got to meet with civilians and to speak with them about their horrific and harrowing stories living under Ukrainian occupation, and some of them who were able to flee. And then I was able to travel to some of the villages outside of Suja and to see the extensive damage caused to housing, to infrastructure, and overall just the devastation wrought by this ongoing hybrid war against Russia. And one thing that became very apparent was that the Western media was lying about what was going on, was lying about what was transpiring, and ultimately justified Ukrainian aggression against the largest nuclear power in the world to fit their narratives and to achieve their goals and aims. And that, of course, shows the great disservice that they did to journalism, and they never even sent anyone to speak with the civilians who had been under the occupation, and it's a great crime in my opinion. And of course, when I was in the Donbass and I reported to the UN the crimes that we were documenting there, I mean, we're talking about 10 plus thousand, 15 plus thousand civilians killed, and the absolute destruction that was wrought long before the special military operation. And what necessitated this special military operation were those ongoing crimes against the Russian speaking people in the Donbass.
Opinion, what do you think that NATO is up to, especially as regards the special military operations?
Listen, NATO is an aggressive military alliance, and its objectives continue to be the encirclement of the Russian Federation, the balkanization, the destruction of the Russian Federation as a country. NATO continues to see Russia not only as an adversary, but as an outright enemy, as the incarnation of everything that they hate and loathe. And so NATO will stop at nothing to continue to expand. It's doing so in Ukraine by training and arming the Ukrainian military. It's trying to interfere in the elections, and it did successfully interfere in the elections in Romania and Moldova. It's doing the same in Georgia, where it has attempted a coup. It's trying to move towards the Far East. There's been talks of opening up a Pacific branch of NATO, which of course is not in the North Atlantic, that's in the Pacific, but they're talking about that. There's a movement in Central Asia. So there's a lot of concern, not to mention the Arctic, which becomes also a major domain of confrontation. So there's a lot of conflict brewing, and NATO shows no sign of letting up and achieving any sort of peaceful resolution, or even it's dissolving because the Warsaw Pact dissolved. We see that NATO is purely an aggressive military alliance, and their goal is to destroy Russia by any means necessary. And that's the greatest danger and threat to humanity today, in my opinion.
You think that there will be a stop to the special military operations if President Zelensky and President Putin can come together and Zelensky says, look, well, I'm not going to be joining NATO, which we all know was the primary reason for all of this in the first place. Do you think that that will sort of end the special military operations already?
Listen, President Putin has been very clear that the root causes need to be addressed. And the root causes are one, NATO, but also the protection of the Russian language, the Russian culture, Russian traditions, the Soviet history. Also, for example, the protection of the Orthodox Church and the Orthodox Church in Ukraine under the Moscow Patriarchate. All of that needs to be protected. There needs to be protections for example, the holidays like May 9th, for Russian literary figures. You know, they've taken down statues of Pushkin and so many others. So everything Russian needs to be respected because that's part of the history, and part and parcel of that land is very deeply tied to Russia's history. Of course, it was the Kievan Rus that were the real founders of what was at that time the Russian people and the first emergence of a Russian state. So I think that all that needs to be addressed. There also needs to be a banning on Ukrainian ultra-nationalist organizations. There needs to outright be no Nazism, right? Denazification was one of the main elements of the special military operation. So Azov needs to be banned. Azov battalion needs to be banned. Azov battalion needs to be banned. Right sector needs to be banned. All these organizations need to go. And basically, it needs to be demilitarized, and we need to figure out a proper solution to how to handle peace and security there. But there's a lot of things that are at the root of this current crisis that has been ongoing since 2014 that need to be addressed. And until those are addressed, this special military operation will continue.
All right. So as we begin to wrap up, do you think that the GFCN is, achieving the goal, maybe slowly but surely, in terms of making sure that the stories, coming out from the global south are sort of balanced?
Absolutely. GFCN has been at the forefront of doing very good work, very good investigative work. We've seen many of the experts, including myself and yourself and many others, who have been at the forefront of revealing a lot of information, a lot of fake news and narratives, trying to combat the ongoing misinformation. And of course, GFCN has been cited in many international publications. Also, our reports have been handed out at the United Nations. So GFCN is at the forefront of the work that's being done to combat the ongoing misinformation, disinformation, fake news coming out of the mainstream media, especially in the West, and will continue to do so. And I look forward to our ongoing work, both individually and jointly, because of the enormous capabilities and capacities that GFCN has, and the tremendous credentials and work ethic of many of the experts at GFCN who really value the journalistic profession and want to see a pursuance of truth, and want to see that we continue to shed a light on all of the areas that the West tries to conceal, especially from viewers all around the world.
There will be more developing stories and we'll bring to our audience. Thank you so much for joining in tonight. Christopher Hilali, investigative journalist in the USA and of course in Russia. Thank you for joining in tonight.
Thank you very much for having me.
And just before we go, here's a recap of the top stories.